This is the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now when Jesus heard about the beheading of John the Baptist, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to the disciples, "The crowds need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And Jesus said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled, and they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. And those who were fed numbered 5,000 men, plus women and children. 5,000 men, plus women and children. So I'm going to be conservative here and say that's an estimate of about 10,000 people total, which I looked up is more than the seating capacity of Jackson Field, where the Lansing Lugnuts play. 10,000 people were fed to satisfaction with 5 loaves and 2 fish, and there were 12 baskets full of leftovers when they were done. What we have witnessed, my friends, is a biblical story about a funeral potluck. The temptation with this story is to jump right to the miracle of the feeding of the multitudes. When we do that with this telling of the story, however, we miss out on context that makes Matthew's telling of the story much richer. It's not that hard to miss, really. After all, the story of Jesus feeding the multitudes with some combination of loaves and fish occurs 6 times in the Gospels. And it's the only miracle sign that Jesus performs in all 4 of our gospel lessons, or our gospels rather. But in each situation, the context is different. And it becomes a temptation for us to either conflate the circumstances surrounding the event or pretend that it happened in a vacuum and ignore the larger story altogether. But the gospel writers didn't throw details in just for kicks. Matthew had something in mind when he mentioned the event that triggered Jesus going off on his own. The reason Jesus needed a moment to himself was because he had just heard of the beheading of his friend, his colleague, his cousin, who we refer to as John the Baptist. And it happened at Herod's birthday party. What a blow that must have been. His partner in ministry, the one who prepared the way, dead. In other words, Jesus doesn't just randomly go off for some alone time before this miracle. He takes off in a boat to have some time to process the news he had received about someone he loved, to sit in his humanness and mourn and be angry and feel all of those things we feel when someone whom we love dies. The interesting thing is that instead of going up a mountain, which was Jesus' usual place to go, he goes to a deserted place. I wonder if that wasn't just a description of where Jesus was, but also of what Jesus' mindset was. I wonder if spiritually and emotionally, Jesus, the human being, was in a deserted place, filled with grief, knowing his turn to meet his own fate was not that far off. And then all of a sudden, 5,000 men plus women and children just show up. People who would have also heard the news that John the Baptist had been killed at the whim of Herod's wife. People who would have known the relationship that was there between Jesus and John. People who would have also been grieving. People who would have wanted to comfort Jesus in his grief. Matthew tells us that Jesus had compassion on them and cured their sick. But why? What was it about the 5,000 men plus women and children that caused Jesus to have compassion on them? After all, compassion means with the suffering. Compassion, with the suffering. If I had wanted to be alone and 10,000 people decided for me that I wasn't going to get that chance, I know that what I would be feeling would probably not be compassion. However, I have this image in my head of the women from the surrounding villages each deciding, upon hearing John the Baptist's fate and Jesus' retreat, that Jesus is going to need something to eat to make him feel better. That is, he's going to need some company out there in the deserted place. So they pull what little they have from their pantries, scrape together the best dish they could with those meager portions. They round up their families and they head out to meet Jesus. They don't have much to bring, but it is something, and it comes from the heart. And when Jesus steps ashore, he sees that from the deserted place springs compassion and abundance. Jesus, seeing their care and concern for him, finds himself no longer with an emotional basket that's empty, but filled to the brim and overflowing. We know the feeling. To have one friend seek you out in the midst of an emotional desert is one thing. To have 10,000 of them is quite another. And in having his emotional basket filled to overflowing, he sees that the people who came to him were also mourning. And they were afraid, for they had followed John, and would Herod come for them too? And were they hungry? For one of the reasons John died was because he stood up to a man who was cruel and who failed to look out for his people. Upon seeing Jesus, the people saw that from the deserted place springs compassion and abundance. He starts by curing their sick. In fact, he spends all day curing their sick. He gets so carried away in caring for the crowds that the disciples have to stop him and urge him to send the folks away so they can eat. It's reasonable. And this is then the part that we all remember. This is the Sunday school story or the vacation Bible school story. Jesus takes 5 loaves and 2 fish the disciples give him. He blesses and breaks those loaves and gives them back to the disciples, and everyone eats and is satisfied, and there are copious amounts of leftovers. And the miracle is that in seeing the generosity of Jesus and his disciples, the people share what little they brought with them. Generosity breeds generosity, after all. And from those meager portions came a potluck of epic proportions. And everyone saw that day that from the deserted place springs compassion and abundance. How often, how recently have you been to the deserted place? Jesus has been there. Every time one of us goes to the deserted place, Jesus goes with us. Jesus is no stranger to the deserted place. The deserted place is where we go when we are mourning and feel like we have nothing left to give. The deserted place is where we go when we are burned out and seeking solitude. The deserted place is where we go when we feel isolated and ignored and unloved. The deserted place is where we go when it seems as if the whole world is falling apart around us. So why even bother anymore? The deserted place is where we go when we are ready to give up because we have hit all the roadblocks and taken the wrong turn time and time again, and it doesn't feel as if we know where we are anymore. The deserted place often feels like hell. And Jesus knows it well because he's been there and back for our sakes. But he loves us so much, he is willing to keep going back to show us that from the deserted place, there can still spring compassion and abundance. When we find ourselves in the deserted place, Jesus meets with us with the same compassion with which he met the crowds. And he is present with us in our suffering, assuring us that because we are his children, we are loved, we are valued, and we are enough. He feeds us a meal that fills our hungry hearts and sends us on our way, baskets filled to the brim and overflowing. Even though challenges will meet us and each other in the deserted place, we are nourished with love and compassion and the abundance of God. In many ways, I think the kingdom of heaven is like a potluck. Everyone brings what they can, even if all you can manage to scrape together is yourself that day. Everyone eats their fill, even if the potato salad runs out. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, when Jesus is involved, there is always more than enough left over. Amen.